In this section, we want to create a sentence structure for the kid who played basketball fought me when I was a pro. Now, there's a couple things here that we don't know how to deal with. We don't know how to deal with this thing that said who played basketball. This is describing the kid in some way. So we call these relative clauses. And then we also have when I was a pro. So we have this sentence, I was a pro in here, but it's being introduced by this word that's an adverbial, and it's modifying the entire sentence. So this is what's going to be called an adverbial clause. So let's get into it. Subordinate clauses are any clause that is inserted into another element. So we would have matrix clause, and then we have any subordinate clauses inside of it. Or really, these are just the dependent clauses. So you can think of matrix clauses as being independent, subordinate clauses being dependent, but matrix clauses can also be dependent if you have a dependent inside of a dependent, because matrix and subordinate are relative terms. So I attacked him when he stole my pudding. When he stole my pudding is the dependent clause that depends on the independent matrix clause to exist. Neo wondered if he should take the red pill. So here we have a dependent clause. It's acting as a direct object here, and then Neo wondered would be the beginning of our main clause here because it has a subject and tensed predicate. So that'll be our subordinate clauses, and we're going to have three different types that we look at throughout the rest of the course. We have adverbial clauses, relative clauses, and then we'll take a look at how we can reduce relative clauses to different types of phrases like participle phrases, and then we'll take a look at noun clauses and WH clauses in the end. So the subordinate conjunction, labeled subconj, is going to provide a transition between clauses. So these introduce complete clauses. This means that if you have a subordinative conjunction connected up to some sort of clause, which we'll discover are going to be adverbial clauses, it must take a sentence as a complement, a complete clause. So some examples of subconjues would be things that look like prepositions. So things like after, before, until, in the case of except, or while, or like, or as. But the difference between subconj and prepositions, which is what you would expect some of these words to be, is that a subconj has an entire clause after, a preposition just has a noun phrase after. So after I eat is an example of a subconj because I eat is a sentence, but after the event is an example of a preposition because the event comes after the preposition. It's a noun phrase. So here's some examples of some subordinate conjunctions creating adverbial clauses. So as I left the store, someone tried to mug me. This is an adverbial of time. Wherever he normally rests, it isn't here. So wherever is introducing the clause. So this is a subconj, and then he normally rests is the sentence. If you eat too much, you will gain weight. So if you eat too much is dependent on the independent, you will gain weight. The cafeteria made the food too expensive for me, therefore I can't afford to purchase from there anymore. So I can't afford to purchase from there anymore is a complete sentence, and therefore is introducing it as a link. The guy talks as if he's the king of the town. So here we have a subordinate conjunction that is two words in this case. So he's the king of the town is sentence. That guy talks is a sentence, but as if he's the king of the town is dependent on the independent clause that guy talks. So how you can identify these subconj adverbial clauses is just by doing movement. So when I'm done, I'll go to the movies compared to I'll go to the movies when I'm done. These adverbial clauses have freedom of movement because they're adverbials. So here are some examples of some adverbial clauses. The first one is the causal type, and these are introduced by words like because, since, or for. So I arrested him because I had no other choice. Since Jeff was the richest, he always bought dinner. So these give some sort of reason of causation. So because is an explanation, since is an explanation. So you can think of causal or explanatory in these cases. So explanation. We have temporal. So Before, after, while, during, these are related to time. So when we last tried this event, everything was terrible. Or please come to the room as soon as you can. So we have an as here, subordinating conjunction, and when. So, in fact, some linguists would even say that as soon as you can, those whole three things are the subordinating conjunction. But there's another way that we can interpret this too. Just as linguists, we can also say this is a preposition. This is, so if you try to do something like this, like a preposition and adverb, it doesn't quite work out. So, linguists might think there's another interpretation, but it just doesn't quite work out that way. So, locative. So, where or wherever, where we were standing, we could see the entire skyline. They worked wherever they could be paid well. So, these are locations. So, where we were standing, wherever they could be paid well. Note that we can move these around because these are adverbial clauses. We have conditions. So, if, then, or unless. So, if you eat too many cookies, you'll start gaining weight. This is the condition for the independent clause to happen. Or, I'm not walking in there unless you pay me $25,000. So, this is the condition for walking in there. We have concessive, so these are like, I did this thing, but I didn't really have a justification for it. So I attacked him, although I didn't have a reason to do so. So although I didn't have a reason to do so, I attacked him. We also have manner or comparison, so these are the as phrases. So please do it as I said, or as I said, please do it. So we can move these around. Now that you've seen a few examples, I want you to identify whether each underlined phrase is a prepositional phrase or adverbial clause. So pause the video, try it yourself. Now let's go over the answers. So after we finish dinner. So we finished dinner is an independent clause inside if we were to make it standalone. So after is introducing a sentence. This is an adverbial clause. After dinner, we played cards. So dinner here is just going to be a noun phrase. Therefore, this is going to be a prepositional phrase. Arrived before the winter of the deep snow. So here we see another noun phrase here. So this will be a prepositional phrase before. Before leaving work, I always eat breakfast. This one might be a little bit tricky, but leaving work is a gerund phrase, which means before is acting as a preposition here since gerunds act as nouns. So this is a prepositional phrase. And finally, I always eat breakfast before I go to work. I go to work is a sentence. So here we have an adverbial clause. So at this point, we can go back to the structure we originally wanted to determine, and now we see what's happening up with when on the right. So we have an adverbial clause, adverbial, when I was a pro, and that's being headed by this subordinating conjunction when. Now we just need to figure out what's going on with the relative clause, who played a basketball.